All right, everyone. So, college football, we're a day away here of week one starting. And so, we're going to go over just the Thursday night games. And we're going to go over some. Some are not going to be as in depth. There's a few games I haven't really looked at. So, we're not going to touch on those. But the ones I have, we're going to get into. So, we'll start here with Boise State versus South Florida. Now, I'm going to read kind of my notes on both of these teams and give you some of the upsides and downsides and talk about the games overall. So in Boise State's case, the big headline thing and the thing I really focused on is them losing Ashton Genty. Now I understand a lot of people talk about, well, they got a good running back, so they're not going to have that big of a drop off. But the issue I have with that is this Ashton Genty is one of those guys who is just a star through and through. He's the engine of the offense of teams he's on. You see the hype even going into the NFL. So my problem is when you go from that to even a really good running back, you're setting the standard pretty high for him to fill the shoes of Ashton Genty. And how soon can he do that? There's a variety of things, right? So that to me is a very worrying sign. And as the season goes on, and maybe we see the running back play, we go, "Oh, that actually wasn't as big of a deal." But when I haven't seen what this looks like yet, that is a really big concern for me. From what I've read, the defensive line, and I'm not a scout, but the defensive line has gotten a little bit worse for Boise State, but the secondary better. So that's something maybe that we keep our eyes on throughout the year. But like I said, to this point, we can only go off of, we can't go off like a lot of game film, right? We're just going off what we see. Okay, so USF, they they have some pretty good stuff here. So their QB is coming back. Okay, they have a veteran offensive line. They did lose also wide receivers and a running back, but they have 8 returning starters on defense, and this is going to be a veteran team. They were 7-6 against the spread last year, and 4-1 against the spread against non-conference opponents. Now I have already bet this game at South Florida +6. As you can see, the line moved to +5.5. So if you haven't got that in there, I still am fine with it at 5.5, but I did get it at 6 just to be clear on that. I'm going to be betting South Florida. To me, when we're looking at, and I'm, betting my card, and it doesn't mean individually all these bets hit, but I just have a problem, especially you have USF, a veteran team getting their QB back, a lot of really, in my opinion, really good omens for the opening day. Whereas Boise State, I just have a lot of question marks. And when you're telling me I'm getting a team that has plus the points, I'm going to stick with it, right? And once again, I completely understand a lot of people are on Boise State. A lot of people aren't as down as I am on in that sense, but I'm really really liking South Florida in this plus the points. Ohio and Rutgers, I actually didn't do a ton of reading into this game, so I'm not going to go through each team individually. The one thing I do want to point out is that Rutgers line has moved. I think this thing may have even opened at 10.5. It is now at 15.5. It might not have been 10.5. It could have been like 11 or 12. But the point is, it's moved significantly in the direction of Rutgers is now a much bigger favorite than they were to start. So that's one thing that I always keep in mind, because if you're getting such a bad number by comparison, it kind of makes me a little bit nervous to bet that. But at the end of the day, if you're someone who thinks Rutgers is going to run over Ohio, go ahead and lay that. Bowling Green, Lafayette did not do a ton of read into that one, so I don't want to give bad information on that. So we'll just go to this next game, which I did do a decent amount of research on. So East Carolina, okay, they run the air raid offense. They're getting their QB back, but they don't have a ton of returning starters. They do have 8 seniors starting on the defensive end. Now, I keep bringing up kind of the returning because remember, we don't have a lot of film on these teams as it pertains to this season. We have no film for most of the teams unless they played week 0. So it's really important that I look and I go, oh, okay, they have these guys coming back, because sometimes it takes 1, 2, 3 weeks for a team that has a lot of new players to have them gel. If you have a lot of returning starters or you have a lot of players who have been in the program for quite some time, it helps, especially week 1. So that's one of the reasons a lot of my advice is going to be just giving you kind of, like I said, not opinion, just fact on guys that are returning. Now let's go to NC State. So they're getting their quarterback back as well. So we have 2 teams, both of them are getting their QBs back, which I just think is crucial, crucial, crucial. Um, NC State did lose their defensive coordinator, and they have a lots of transfers on defense. Remember, NC State, this is a really, really good defensive team. Losing your DC, lots of transfers on defense. might mean there's some issues defensively to start the year. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed, but it's something to keep your eyes on. So I was going back and forth. There's two things I liked here. I do like East Carolina plus 14, and I also like the over because I think when you're talking about a team like East Carolina, right? The reason this spread is this high is because East Carolina is going to want to be putting up points, right? Or they're going to try to. NC State might not be as good as defense as we remember, but bringing that QB back means that you're going to have an offense that probably is going to look a little bit better than if he wasn't returning. So I don't hate the plus 14 just because it's so many points. And one problem you have when you run with a big spread like this, if you have a 14-point spread, you can't have this other team also scoring, right? You need to also kind of lock them down defensively. So if the defense is just not there yet, then I think the plus 14 is fine. I also don't hate the over. If you're really like, man, I just don't want to trust East Carolina, I don't hate the over here. So those I placed the plus 14 in East Carolina, but I think the over is just as good of a play. And it actually, when I first got it, it was over 60 and a half. It's now at 61 and a half. So people are seeing that number and they're betting that thing up because that is, I think, like I said, if you think East Carolina is going to score, this is one of the reasons I bet the plus 14 because I think they're going to be able to score. And even though you might say, oh, well, that would make you want to do the over, I actually think plus 14 is safer in that instance because if they're scoring, it's going to be tough for NC State to cover a 14-point spread. If they're not, and in that case, now you need a lot of points to get to the 60 and a half, whereas the 14, you don't need any points, right? We need nothing. We just need the plus 14. Okay. Jacksonville State, UCF didn't do a ton on that. Akron, Wyoming didn't do a ton on that. I didn't do a ton on. I'm not, like I said, we really wanted to focus in on some of these major games. So we only, I think, looked at one more on this slate. This is another game we didn't do a ton of research into, but 17 and a half, Buffalo, don't hate that. All right. So this is the one that we looked into. All right. This is the big game that we looked into. And why I say this is the big game is because I went and completely changed everything I was doing on this one. If you asked me at the end of last season, if you asked me a month ago, if you asked me a week ago, if you asked me 3 days ago who I was betting in this game, I would have told you Nebraska. I'm a huge fan of what Nebraska can do this year. I like their QB. I like their coach. But then I just kept hearing, Nebraska, 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 Nebraska for this game. And I said, is nobody even considering Cincinnati covering this game? So I had to do a little bit of research, and we're going to redo both sides here, but I may have had a big change on this. And once again, before I get into it too, here's another thing to understand is I don't look at week one as whatever you bet week one is how you think of the team. Meaning if you like Nebraska and you don't, then you bet them week one. I think week one or week zero, depending, right? But in and of itself, right? Week one, it is really not a testament. Like even NC State, we're talking about before I get into the next one. Even NC State, I'm talking about their defense. They lose their DC, lose a lot of starters. By week 5, by week 6, by week 7, NC State may have just as good of a defense as we remember. We're talking only about week 1, and I think it's important to break that off because I think sometimes, and I've fallen in this trap too, when people are betting games, they think, I think NC State's good, so therefore I'm going to just, bet them in this spot. Well, they might be maybe if this game was held in week 6 or week 7, this would be a no-brainer, right? But in this case, right now, I'm on East Carolina. And it's also important to note that let's say NC State doesn't cover this spread. And let's say NC State's stock is falling and falling and falling. Maybe it becomes a game where in week 5, because their stock is kind of falling, now you can bet NC State a lot because there's so much value. So just keep that in mind, right? And I that's why I wanted to bring it up for this game. So for starters, for Nebraska, they get Dylan Raiola back, who's their quarterback. This is a huge deal. Okay, this is a guy who's done some good. He's had some struggles, but he's back again, right? So he's going to have all of that, experience and all of that kind of stuff. That's huge. They have a lot of returning starters on the offensive end, was outside of Dylan Raiola. Once again, this is big, right? This is a team that is going to be hitting the ground running very, very early. Defense, on the other hand, only has 5 returning starters, but they're still expected to be pretty good. So offensively, this team is expected not expected. They have a lot of returning starters, including their QB. So all of this stuff I just read bodes very well for Nebraska. this season. Here's my problem. Cincinnati, okay, is improved on offense and defense. They have lots of returning starters as well. So when we're talking about two teams, right? One team has a lot of returning starters, the other one has a lot of returning starters. Having a 7-point spread here, that's what I got it at, but it's now 6.5. Having that 7-point spread here is crucial, right? Having that spread is crucial. I don't know if Nebraska is going to hit the ground running and run through with a 7-point win. I kind of like Cincinnati. I mean, 6.5, we're getting a little more dicey, obviously. I mean, I would still bet it. I'm just saying, the 7 is a better number. But I like having Cincinnati at plus 6.5, plus 7. You have two teams that have lots of returning starters. I think Nebraska wins this game by 3 or 4, right? I don't see them running away with it. So if that's the case, that's why I'm sitting there with Cincinnati. Now, I could be dead wrong. And like I said, it might be one of those things I look back and I say, I had the perfect bet all off season, the perfect bet all year, and I decided to throw it all away at the last minute. But I just couldn't get over kind of the constant talking about Nebraska. Oh, Nebraska's going to be this, Nebraska's going to be that, which I agree with. And no one was talking about Cincinnati. I'll read again. And Cincinnati's supposed to be improved on offense and defense, and they have lots of returning starters. That is crucial early on. So, yes, Nebraska has a lot of returning starters. They are getting their QB back, but Cincinnati is getting 7 points and having a lot of that. And history tells us with Nebraska, from watching them even last year, that this is a team I bet on all the time. And they just, even when they were winning, it was like, okay, they were able to go ahead and get the win by 3 or 4, but it was just an ugly win at times. And so I think Nebraska underwhelms as it pertains to the spread here. I do think they pull out the win, but I just don't think they win by more than 7. I think it's a lot closer, and I think everybody has kind of jumped on the Nebraska, bandwagon here, and this game might kind of stall that a little bit, only for it to pick up and have a better year, which I'm hoping for. I'm hoping Cincinnati covers this and Nebraska wins so that I could bet Nebraska all year. So those are the games I looked into. You could talk about Wisconsin, Miami, Ohio, but to me, those 3 games are really the ones that I just felt there was the most value in those games from a betting standpoint. So that's why I went with them. So put in the comment section below what you think. Remember, there's no profit guaranteed from any of this. I'm not a betting expert, right? I'm not, as they call them, a sharp, just someone that likes to gamble on football games. And I want to make sure you know what my thinking is. So even if you disagree, you go, oh, but this is why he thought that. So thank you all for watching.